Here's $10,000. Be my fiancé for a week, the lonely CEO said. She said yes and taught him love again. The rain in Port Harridan didn't just fall. It interrogated the pavement. Alara Wynne knew the sound well. It was the rhythm of her life in Easton State, methodical, gray and relentless. She was a freelance financial forensic specialist, a digital bloodhound who sniffed out the lies men told with numbers. Her apartment, smelling of old files and fresh coffee, was her sanctuary, until the phone cut through the quiet. The caller ID was blocked. Alara almost let it go to voicemail, but a nagging professional instinct made her answer. Miss Wynne. The voice was not a question. It was a statement, low, precise, and cold as the steel girders holding up the Morro Span Bridge. My name is Ronan Vale. Alara sat up straight. Ronan Vale, the phantom CEO of Auburn Atlas Holdings, a corporation so vast and opaque it was practically a shadow government for the entire eastern seaboard. He was a myth wrapped in a bespoke suit, never photographed, never interviewed. Mr. Vale, she replied, her own voice betraying nothing. I have a proposal, he continued, the lack of preamble more jarring than a shout. I require your services for 1 week. Beginning this Friday, you will accompany me to Harbor Light Manor as my fiancé. In return, you will be paid $10,000. Silence. Alara processed the words. Fiancé, Harbor Light Manor, $10,000. $10,000. It was the exact sickening number she needed. The exact retainer the shark-skinned lawyer specializing in federal economic cases had quoted her. 2 days ago, her brother, Caleb, a junior analyst at a rival firm, had been escorted from his desk by agents from the Bureau of Economic Integrity. The charge was administrative detention, a chillingly sterile term for being disappeared into the system over a single, poisoned spreadsheet. Alara knew Caleb. He was meticulous, cautious, and incapable of the kind of fraud the BEI was implying. He had been framed. Why me? Alara asked, her mind already calculating, tracing the lines of the problem. You are unattached, your background is verifiable, and you possess a necessary discretion. And the voice paused. You are currently in a position to appreciate the liquidity of my offer. He knew about Caleb. Of course he knew. The chill deepened. This wasn't a random offer. It was a calculated move on a board she hadn't even known she was playing on. I need an answer in the next 60 seconds. Miss Wynne. I have terms, she said, the words tasting like metal. The next day, she was in the glass and steel heart of the Auburn Atlas Tower, a place that made the Port Harridan skyline look like a child's toy. Ronan Vale in person was more fortress than man. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light, and his eyes held the flat, cold calm of the deep ocean. A faint, silver scar traced the line of his left wrist, disappearing under his cuff. The situation is this, he said, steepling his fingers on a table so polished it looked like a black mirror. Next week, I'm hosting a reconciliation summit at Harbor Light Manor. The heads of the Valente, Kuznets, and Arroyo families will be in attendance. Alara's blood ran a little colder. These were not corporate families. They were families. The kind that didn't use contracts when a bullet would do. My position requires me to manage their competing interests. They have a dated idea of stability. They believe a marriage would anchor me, make me more predictable. Specifically, they wish to force a union with one of their own. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. A fiancé publicly acknowledged makes such negotiations impossible. You are a political shield. My terms, Alara said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the vast table. A separate room, at all times. No physical contact beyond what is necessary for public appearances, the boundaries of which I will define. I control the public relations schedule for my role. He scanned the list, his expression unreadable. And one more, Alara said, her voice hard. You give me full, unrestricted access to the Auburn Atlas ledgers, the hidden ones. Ronan Vale's head lifted, a flicker of something amusement. perhaps, or surprise passed through his eyes. "You believe I am responsible for your brother's situation." "I believe someone at Auburn Atlas framed him to cover their own tracks," Alara countered. "I'm a forensics expert. I'm going to find out who—" $10,000 buys my time. Access buys my silence. It was a bluff, and they both knew it, but it was a damn good one. To her astonishment, Ronan nodded. "Agreed. The ledgers are yours. Your investigation will, of course, be discreet." He agreed so fast it made her suspicious. "But," he added, "there is one condition from my side." He gestured to a corner of the room she hadn't noticed, where another man stood, silent as a statue. "You will need to undergo protocol training. Harbor Light is not a normal environment. The Metropolitan Organized Crime Council has certain expectations. This is Mr. Janus. He will be your handler." The MOCC, a self-appointed, non-governmental shadow council that allegedly kept the peace among the city's elite criminal factions. Alara felt like she was stepping through a mirror. She took a deep breath. This wasn't about romance. It was about justice. It was about Caleb. "I accept." Ronan produced a simple contract. It outlined the dates, the payment, the non-disclosure. It mentioned nothing of ledgers or crime families. Alara signed it with the blue ink pen he provided. As she capped the pen, Ronan swiveled in his chair and touched a control on his desk. A small red light on the wall-mounted camera system blinked and went dark. "The internal cameras in this room are now offline," he said, his voice quiet. "They will remain so for 12 minutes. You have questions about your brother. Ask them." It was the most unexpected move of all. Not a trick, not a power play, but a brief, startling window of trust. Hours later, the sun had set and the rain had returned. Alara sat in the back of a black armored sedan that moved through the wet streets with the silent, heavy grace of a predator. Ronan was beside her, separated by a foot of tense air, staring out his own window. They crossed the bridge, leaving the smog of the city for the salty, iron tang of the coast. Ahead, perched on the cliffs overlooking the dark, churning water, a sprawling estate emerged from the mist. Lights blazed from 100 windows. Harbor Light Manor. It rose against the night sky like a promise of power, wealth, and absolute safety. But as Alara watched it grow closer, the armored car gliding through the gates, she felt a knot of cold certainty. It wasn't a sanctuary, it was a castle built from unsafe promises, and she had just handed over the key. Harbor Light Manor did not welcome you, it appraised you. The entrance ceremony was a precise, chilling ritual involving the pouring of a single glass of sea salt-infused wine, served in a crystal so fine Alara feared her breath might shatter it. Mr. Janus, the MOCC handler, had been ruthlessly efficient. In the span of 2 hours, Alara had learned to identify the subtle hand signals of the guards. A finger brushing the lapel meant a potential threat. A straightened cuff meant all clear. She learned the unspoken rule of exchanged glances, a complex hierarchy of who was allowed to look at whom, and for how long, before deference was shown. In the heavy silence of the armored car before they stepped out, Ronan had produced a small, velvet box. "This is for you," he said. Inside, a sapphire the color of a midnight ocean sat surrounded by small, brilliant diamonds. It was enormous, ostentatious, and cold. "It's a prop," Alara stated, her voice flat. "Of a kind," Ronan agreed. He took her left hand, his touch impersonal, and slid the ring onto her finger. It was heavy. "This is a bait ring. The stone is a custom-fabricated casing. Inside is a micro-recorder, supplied by the Continental Security Authority. It's my insurance policy for these negotiations. It records only when I speak a specific activation phrase. It keeps everyone honest." "Or gives you leverage," Alara countered. "Honesty and leverage are often the same thing. Miss Wynne." The first dinner was an exercise in strained civility. The great hall of Harbor Light Manor, all dark wood and high, shadowed ceilings, felt less like a home and more like a court. The heads of the three families were present: Emilio Valente, all quiet menace and old-world tailoring, and Zoya Kuznets, a matriarch in black silk, her diamonds like chips of ice, who smiled far too often. The Arroyo family was represented by its heir, Luca, a young man with restless eyes, his father apparently delayed. Zoya Kuznets lifted her glass, the diamonds on her hand flashing, to Mr. Vale and his surprising new arrangement. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, settled on Alara. We'd hoped for a different kind of engagement. Ronan, something more. Binding. To one of our own, perhaps. These sudden passions can be so unreliable. The air thickened. It was a test, a velvet-gloved threat. Alara saw Ronan's jaw tighten. Before he could speak, Alara smiled, a slow, academic smile. Unreliable. Madame Kuznets, I find the most unreliable ventures are those that appear most stable, like the contemporary art market. Zoya's smile wavered. For instance, Alara continued, her voice clear and carrying, it's fascinating how one can launder 10 million through a pop-up gallery in Soho using a triptych of uncertain provenance, simply by inflating the valuation through a series of shell company auction bids. The final sale, paid in clean cash, is just a receipt for a service rendered. The table went utterly silent. Emilio Valente paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. Luca Arroyo stared at her. Alara was, in effect, describing the exact mechanics of the Kuznets' primary money laundering operation. Zoya Kuznets placed her wine glass down with a soft click. You are very knowledgeable, Miss Wynne. It's my job to be, Alara said sweetly. Across the table, in the dim, baronial light, Alara saw the corner of Ronan Vale's mouth twitch. It was not a grin. It was the barest upward tilt, a ghost of an expression. But it was unmistakably a smile. It was the first time she had seen it, and it was terrifyingly human. Later, in the safety of her separate, heavily secured suite, Alara finally accessed the encrypted drive Ronan had given her. The access he promised. It wasn't the full, raw ledgers. She knew he was too smart for that, but it was a start. As her program decrypted the files, she began to see the real story. Ronan wasn't just managing his father's empire. He was trying to dismantle it from the inside. He was moving assets, slowly, painfully, from the dark, violent tributaries of organized crime into legitimate, taxable investments. He wanted to end the legacy of violence his father had built, and someone, an insider, was fighting him every step of the way, setting up roadblocks, leaking information, and perhaps framing a mid-level analyst named Caleb Wynne to create a diversion. Alara sat at the antique desk and pulled out the suite's custom stationery. She began to draft a schedule. On the surface, it read like a new couple's itinerary. Morning walk the cliffs, noon lunch at the boathouse, evening pre-gala fittings. But to her, it was a map. The walk on the cliffs took her past the security hub. The boathouse lunch was when the coastal guards changed shifts. The fitting was her alibi for the 2 hours she needed to get into the Manor's archives. She was mapping her route to the Black Fund ledgers when a soft knock came. It was Ronan. A walk, but he said, not as a request. He led her to the orangery, a vast glass and iron structure where the scent of citrus hung heavy in the humid air. Outside, the wind howled off the sea, but inside, it was preternaturally still. You performed well tonight, he said. I'm a consultant, Mr. Vale. I adapt. He stopped by a small, blooming lemon tree, his back to her. My former fiancé, he said, the words sudden. Died at Quarry Line. A truck explosion. It was ruled an accident. Alara said nothing. She hated this world. She wanted me to leave. I told her I needed more time. That the crown, as she called it, wasn't something you just abdicate. He turned, and in the moonlight streaming through the glass, his face was a mask of cold control, but his hand, the one with the silver scar on the wrist, was clenched. As a gust of sea wind rattled the glass panes, Alara saw the scar tissue tremble. just slightly. It was a tremor he could not control. Alara realized, with a sudden, unwanted pang, that his solitude was not an act. It was a scar, just like the one on his wrist, and it was just as real. The next morning, Alara was walking the coastal path, supposedly on her lover's schedule, when she saw Luca Arroyo ahead, leaning over a low stone wall, admiring the view. He was smoking, relaxed. Alara watched him idly until she saw a glint of metal in the moss-covered stones near his feet. It was a small, pressure-activated plate, newly disturbed. It was the kind of trap her training with Janus had barely covered, a spring-loaded blade designed to sever an ankle, not to kill. A message. "Don't move, Luca," Alara shouted. He froze, turning. "Look down by your left foot." He saw it. The color drained from his face. "Valente's bastards," he whispered. "Step back, slowly, do not shift your weight," Alara commanded, her voice crisp with forensic calm. She grabbed a heavy ornamental rock from a nearby urn, and with a swift, clean motion, she rolled it onto the plate. There was a vicious thwack as a 6-inch blade shot out from the wall, embedding itself in the rock. Luca Arroyo stared at the blade, then at Alara, his usual swagger gone. He said nothing, but his nod was a vow. Her credit with the Arroyo family had just skyrocketed. She returned to her room, her heart pounding, the adrenaline fading. Her phone, a secure burner given to her by Janus, vibrated on the desk. It was an anonymous text, a new message. It contained only 2 things: a grainy, time-stamped photograph of Caleb, head down, being led by 2 BEI guards in a sterile, concrete hallway, and a single line of text: "Don't fall for him, he will choose the crown." The image of Caleb in that sterile hallway haunted Alara. She pushed the chill of the anonymous warning away and focused on the cold, hard data. Ronan had given her access, but it was a curated garden, walled off and pruned. She needed the wilderness. Her mind, trained to see patterns in financial chaos, sifted through the terabytes. She found it deep in a nested subledger, a dormant account coded Aegis 77. It was a ghost, a digital pass-through. Millions of dollars flowed into it from Auburn Atlas's more specialized logistics contracts and then vanished. But the money didn't just disappear. Alara ran a trace algorithm watching the funds atomize and reform. They were being funneled in small, untraceable increments into a non-profit organization, the Sable Hands Foundation. A quick search showed the foundation was a legitimate, high-profile charity. A deeper search, the kind Alara specialized in, revealed the truth. The board of directors of the Sable Hands Foundation consisted almost entirely of close relatives and known associates of the Metropolitan Organized Crime Council. It was a bribery engine, a sophisticated, tax-deductible slush fund to keep the self-appointed council on Auburn Atlas's payroll. This was the rot Ronan was trying to cut out. But Aegis 77 was a dead end on the digital front. The trail was designed to go cold at the foundation. Alara needed the physical source code, cross-referencing the account's creation date with internal memos. She found a single, cryptic entry: hard copy authorization stored, Greywater Port Branch, box 412. She needed to get off the manor grounds, and she needed an alibi that wouldn't raise suspicion. The next morning, she used the house phone to make a call, knowing the line was monitored. "Yes, Mr. Janus," she said, her voice bright. "I absolutely must have a fitting for the gala. Could you arrange a car for me at 2 p.m. Nocturne Silk on the main avenue?" The alibi was perfect, a frivolous, vain errand. No one would question it. The boutique was a cloud of white silk and whispering assistants. Alara endured 30 minutes of being pinned and measured before slipping out the rear service entrance. The Greywater Port Bank was a different world. Cold marble, colder tellers. Using a forged press ID and a proxy access request she'd fabricated the night before. She was past security in 10 minutes. The safe deposit box was cold to the touch. Inside, there was no paper, only a single, slate-gray hard drive. She pocketed it and took the service stairs to the roof, her planned exfiltration route. The air on the rooftop was sharp with salt and wind. She moved low and fast toward the fire escape. A flash of light, not from the sun, blinded her. It came from the rooftop of the warehouse across the street, a glint, a lens, a rifle scope. She didn't even have time to suck in a breath. A hand, impossibly fast, clamped onto the back of her coat, yanking her backward with enough force to lift her off her feet. She hit the gravel of the roof hard, the air driven from her lungs. Ronan Vale's body was a solid, immovable weight on top of her. A microsecond later, the air cracked open. A high-velocity round smashed into the steel doorframe she had been about to pass through. Shrapnel pinged off the metal. Another shot, and the thick-paned glass window of the roof access door exploded, raining a shower of glittering, deadly stars down onto the gravel. A silent, terrifying rescue. "Valente's man," Ronan growled in her ear, his voice a low vibration against her back. He pushed himself off her, hauling her to her feet and shoving her toward a heavy freight elevator she hadn't seen. The metal doors ground shut, plunging them into the cramped, dark space. The elevator smelled of oil and rust. Ronan hit the button for the ground floor, his fist connecting with the steel panel. "You were followed." His voice was a razor. "I got what I needed," Alara said, her hand closing around the hard drive in her pocket. "You got a sniper, see," he countered, his fury palpable. He slammed his hand against the wall, and the whole elevator car seemed to shudder. "You walk into a bank, alone, in the middle of a war I am trying to control. From now on, you are confined to the manor. My security team will be your shadow." Alara's own anger rose, cold and sharp. "No." She stepped forward, forcing him to look at her. "I am not one of your assets. Mr. Vale, I'm not a piece on your board. I am here to find out who framed my brother. A crime that happened under your roof. I demand autonomy. I'm offering you protection, and I am rejecting your control." The elevator groaned to a halt. They stood inches apart. The air was thick, charged with adrenaline and something else. His chest rose and fell with his ragged breaths. Alara could see the fine lines of strain around his eyes, the muscle in his jaw working. He was close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body. They were breathing the same small parcel of air, but the line between them was a canyon. "I am not," Alara said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The woman you lost at Quarry Line? I will not be your collateral." The fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by something cold and shattered. He stepped back, the motion stiff, as if his bones ached. "No," he said, "you are not." Back in her suite, the drive was a revelation. The Aegis 77 account was a front, the real account. The one authorizing the payments to Sable Hands was linked to a single name, Seraphine Gale. It wasn't a name, it was a designation. Alara recognized the syntax from an old Auburn Atlas hostile takeover contract. It was a phantom partner alias, used to disguise executive action. She dug, who had authorization for phantom aliases. The logs pointed to One Division Logistics. The rumors she'd heard on the street suddenly crystallized. Ronan's cousin, Beckett Vale, ran logistics. Beckett, the prodigal son, the one who lived in Ronan's shadow. The rumor was that Beckett was moving something new, something dangerous. They called it Stone Fog. Alara's blood ran cold. Looking at the code fragments, she saw its true purpose. Stone Fog wasn't just encryption. It was a weapon. It didn't just delete data. It rewrote history. A mobile, quantum encryption technology that could fabricate a false digital reality, complete with timestamps and verified signatures. The Bureau of Economic Integrity hadn't been bribed. They had been fooled. Beckett had used Stone Fog to create a perfect, fabricated set of spreadsheets and wire transfers, all pointing to Caleb Wynn. To free her brother, she didn't need to find a file. She needed the machine itself. She found Ronan in his study. He was standing by the window, watching the sea. "It's Beckett," she said, no preamble. He's moving a device called Stone Fog. He used it to frame Caleb. Ronan didn't turn. The data I retrieved from the bank, Alara continued. It shows the device prototype is stored at Pier Kestrel, Warehouse C. Ronan turned, his face a mask of cold control. Warehouse C is my personal, biometrically sealed bonded storage. Not even Beckett can enter. Then he can't get to it, Alara said, and neither can I. Ronan walked to his desk. He opened a locked drawer and removed a single, matte black key card. He slid it across the polished wood. Alara looked at the card, then at him. It's an all-access pass, Ronan said, his voice quiet. It bypasses biometric locks. It will open Warehouse C. This is... Alara started. This is abdication. If I use this, he will know it came from you. I know, Ronan said. He looked at her, his eyes clear for the first time, stripped of the CEO's armor. You were almost killed. You brought the evidence to me. You are the only person in this house who is not trying to take the crown. It was a reckless, insane, desperate act of trust. It was the move that could cost him everything. Alara picked up the card. The key card felt heavy in Alara's pocket, a physical weight that matched the new, unspoken trust between them. The Equinox Gala, the centerpiece of the summit, was in 2 days. It was where, Janus had informed them, the press would be present for a controlled photo opportunity, and it was where Ronan was expected to make his engagement to Alara irrefutably public. They will expect a performance, Ronan said. They were in the Manor's music room, a cavernous space dominated by a grand piano and a cold, baronial fireplace made of gray stone. Ronan had ordered the fire lit, the flames now cast dancing, warm shadows on the walls, a stark contrast to the cold wind rattling the windows. The gala, he continued, pacing in front of the fire, is the one moment they will all be watching us. The families, the council, the press. They need to believe this is real. They need to be convinced, or the entire shield is worthless. You're talking about the proposal script, Alara said, standing by the piano. She was wearing a simple cashmere wrap over her dress, more for comfort than warmth. Yes, we need to rehearse. The timing, the words, the gesture. He looked stiff, uncomfortable. A man forced to discuss the mechanics of an emotion he had long since walled off. All right, Alara said, walking toward him. Show me. What's the plan? I will give a short speech, as he said, his voice the familiar, flat monotone of the CEO, a toast to the future of the harbor. Then I will turn to you, and I will say the words, and I will go down on one knee. Alara almost laughed, but the look on his face stopped her. He was deadly serious. You're going to kneel in front of them. It is what is expected, he said. It is the most public-facing gesture of submission. They will read it as a sign of strength, paradoxically, that I am so secure in my power I can afford to show devotion. Fine, Alara said. Let's practice. She stood before him, the fire warming her back. Do the speech. He recited a few sterile lines about shared prosperity and new horizons. It was wooden, lifeless. You're supposed to be in love, Ronan, Alara said softly. You sound like you're reading a balance sheet. He stopped. I'm not an actor. You'd better become one. She moved closer. Try again, and this time, look at me. Not at the empty space where the cameras will be. He started again, his voice still stiff. As he spoke, Alara turned to adjust her wrap. A small, ornamental clasp at her shoulder caught on the fine knit. She fumbled with it, frustrated. Damn it, she muttered. Stay still. Ronan's voice was quiet. He stepped forward, his body eclipsing the fire's light. He was so close she could feel the heat he'd absorbed from the flames. His fingers, long and sure, went to the clasp. He worked at the delicate mechanism. His knuckles brushed the bare skin of her collarbone. It was nothing, a simple, accidental touch, but it sent a jolt through her, sharp and electric, like a spark from a wet wire. She held her breath. He, too, went utterly still. His fingers rested for a fraction of a second against her skin. He wasn't just touching her, he was feeling. He cleared his throat and stepped back, the clasp undone. "It's free." "Thank you," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the sudden silence. "We should practice the dance," he said, gesturing to the open floor. "There will be a waltz." He put a formal hand on her waist, and she placed hers on his shoulder. They moved in a slow, awkward box step. He was a good dancer, precise and controlled, but he held her with a polite, chaste distance. "You're shielding me," Alara observed, her voice low. "Pardon." "Your shoulders. You're angled, as if you're blocking an unseen lens, protecting me from the paparazzi." It was exactly what a man in his position would do. "Instinct," he murmured. "It's good, but it's not enough." Alara took a small breath. This was her role. This was the job. "To make it convincing," she said, "they need to believe I'm just as invested, that I'm not just being protected, but that I trust you." She lifted her left hand from his shoulder. Slowly, deliberately, she laid her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. "To get into character," she said, her excuse flimsy even to her own ears. His suit was fine wool, but beneath it, she felt him. A solid, warm presence, and then a steady, strong thump-thump. She looked up, into his eyes. His heart, which had been perfectly calm, gave a sudden, hard kick against her hand, a skip, and then it began to beat. Faster, heavier, a panicked rhythm that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with her touch. He stared down at her. His mask of control shattered. He was not the CEO. He was just a man, with his heart hammering under her hand. A peal of thunder, low and deep, rattled the entire manor. It was a prelude. A few seconds later, the sky opened. Rain, driven by the sea wind, lashed against the tall windows in a furious, sudden downpour. "The orangery," Ronan said, his voice hoarse. "The glass. I need to check the storm seals." He was already moving, grabbing his coat. Alara, not knowing why, followed him. They ran from the music room, through the side door, and across the 30 feet of open lawn to the glass and iron structure. The rain was cold and instant, soaking them both in seconds. They tumbled into the orangery, slamming the door against the wind. The sound of the storm was instantly muted, replaced by the roar of rain on 1,000 panes of glass. It was warm inside, and the air was thick with the scent of citrus and wet earth. Steam from their rain-soaked clothes and their breathing began to fog the glass, blurring the outside world, enclosing them in a warm, private haze. "The seals are holding," he said, turning from the door. Alara was trying to catch her breath, pushing wet hair from her face. That was intense, and he finished. They stood there, dripping, in the humid, green-scented air. The only light came from the low, yellow lamps that kept the trees warm. "Alara," he said. His voice was different, stripped of all artifice. He didn't move toward her. He just watched her. He took one small, shuddering breath, and in that moment he asked her, with his eyes, a question she had been dreading and perhaps hoping for. Alara felt her own heart answer. She took a single, small step toward him, and she nodded, just a tiny dip of her chin. He met her in the middle. His hands came up to frame her face, his palms rough but warm against her cold skin. He paused, one last time, giving her the chance to retreat. She didn't. His mouth touched hers. It was not the kiss of a man used to taking, but of a man who was starving. It was soft, hesitant, and overwhelmingly gentle. It was a promise, not a possession. It was slow and deep and tasted of rain and a profound, aching loneliness she recognized as a mirror of her own. He pulled her closer, and his arms went around her, a solid, protective circle. But he held her as if she were the most fragile thing in his world, letting her decide the pace, the pressure. Alara's own hands, with a mind of their own, slid up his chest, over his shoulders, and around his neck. Her fingers found the familiar line of the scar on his wrist, then traced the strong cord of his neck. She felt his heart, steady now, beating a new, powerful rhythm against her own. They stayed like that, lost in the warm, humid quiet, the world reduced to the sound of the rain and their own breathing. Slowly, they pulled apart, not all the way. He rested his forehead against hers. They were both breathless, but this time, a small, shared smile touched both their lips. "We still have work to do," Alara whispered, her voice shaky. Ronan's eyes were dark, his voice rough. "And I will wait." He didn't let go of her completely. As they turned to leave the warm, fogged glass sanctuary and step back into the storm, his hand found hers. He laced his fingers through hers. It was a firm, grounding grip. It was not for a role. It was not for the cameras. It was a temporary truce, a new, unspoken accord. They had both, in that small, quiet space, chosen to trust, just one level deeper. The Equinox Gala was a masterpiece of tension and light. The grand ballroom of Harbor Light Manor glittered, suffocating under the weight of diamonds and silk. Alara, in a sapphire blue gown that matched the bait ring on her finger, felt the eyes of every guest. Ronan, immaculate in a black tuxedo, led her to the center of the room. He raised a glass of champagne. "To the future of Port Harridan," he said, his voice carrying, amplified by the microphones, a future built on new foundations. He turned to Alara. The entire room, 1,000 people, held its breath. As he spoke the rehearsed, loving words, Alara smiled. Her eyes locked on his, but her mind was not on him. It was calculating. She was scanning the high balconies, counting the shadows, 3 Valente guards on the east wing, 4 Kuznets men near the north exit, and a single, unknown man in the west alcove, his suit ill-fitting, his gaze too sharp. Ronan went down on one knee. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Cameras flashed in a frantic, blinding strobe. Alara's smile was perfect, a mix of surprise and adoration. She extended her hand as he kissed her knuckles. At that exact moment, the sky outside the massive windows exploded, a cacophony of red, gold, and blue. The fireworks display had begun. The cheer from the crowd was deafening. Alara was the only one in the room who felt it, a low, distant thump that vibrated through the soles of her designer heels. It was a tremor that came not from the sky, but from the ground, from the direction of the coast, Pier Kestrel. She knew, even as she pulled Ronan to his feet in a perfect, loving embrace, that they were too late. The keycard in her purse was useless. The gala dissolved into celebration, but 20 minutes later, the phones began to light up, a new, more insidious explosion. A video, leaked to every major news outlet and social media platform simultaneously, appeared. It was Caleb Wynne. His face was pale, his eyes darting, the audio was tinny. "I did it," he mumbled, the digital artifacts glitching around his mouth. "I moved the money for the Auburn Atlas, all of it. I was the only one." It was a deep fake, a clumsy one to Alara's expert eye, but to the world, it was a confession. Before the video had finished its first loop, a new alert pushed to everyone's phone. The Bureau of Economic Integrity, citing new evidence, was transferring Caleb Wynne to a special high-security monitoring facility to await federal charges. He was being buried. The ballroom's atmosphere curdled. Emilio Valente was the first to move. He strode up to Ronan, his face a mask of thunder. "You bring this thief's sister into our house. You make a mockery of us. The deal is off. Vale, you betrayed the pact." "Betrayed," Zoya Kuznets glided over, her voice like silk over steel. "Or just incompetent, Ronan. This farce changes the terms. My family will require a controlling 51% stake in the harbor project to ensure stability." Luca Arroyo, who'd been silent all night, simply watched from the corner, his expression unreadable. which was the most terrifying reaction of all. Alara's burner phone vibrated. A new file had been delivered. She opened it. It was a single, encrypted log. The decryption key was the serial number from the hard drive she'd found at the bank. She read the contents, and her blood turned to ice. It was a fabricated transfer log, clean and perfect, showing a $10 million payment. It was signed, time-stamped, and digitally verified. From Aegis 77 to Seraphine Gale, authorization E, win. They had not just framed Caleb, they had set her up as the mastermind, the phantom partner Seraphine Gale. She was the fuse, and they had just lit her to burn Ronan's empire to the ground. Before she could even react, Ronan's arm was around her waist, a band of steel. He pulled her against his side, his body a shield. He stepped onto the dais, his face carved from ice. "This gala is over," he announced. "The summit is postponed. There has been an attempt to sabotage Auburn Atlas and my family. My fiancé," he said, the word a steel trap, "is under my protection. Any move against her is a move against me." He didn't wait for a response. His security team, the Blue, materialized, forming a wedge. He swept Alara out of the ballroom, leaving a chaos of speculation and fury in his wake. They weren't in his study. They were in a concrete bunker 2 floors below the wine cellar. A war room, with reinforced walls and its own air supply. "They hit Pier Kestrel," Ronan said, his back to her as he looked at a bank of dark screens. "Stone Fog is gone. They used the gala as a cover." "They framed me. Ronan," Alara said, her voice shaking with rage, not fear. "They're calling me Seraphine Gale." "I know." He turned. His face was devoid of emotion. "They used the deep fake to discredit you, to isolate me. It's Beckett. It has to be." "I agree," Alara said. "He's cleaning the house. He took the device, framed Caleb, and now he's framed me to take you down." Ronan shook his head, a small, dark motion. "It's too clean, too obvious. Beckett is a jackal, but this is a lion's work." He walked to a steel safe, spun the dial, and pulled out a single, thin file. He slid it across the steel table to her. "You asked me about Quarryline, about the woman I lost." Alara opened it. It was a coroner's report. "Cause of death," she read. "Vehicular malfunction. Accidental. Just like you said." "That's the public report," Ronan said. He handed her a second file, this one older, the paper yellowed. "This is the one I commissioned myself, the one I've kept for 3 years." Alara opened it. Her breath caught. "Cause of death. Explosive ordnance. Traces of C4. Homicide." She looked up at him, the implication settling over her like a shroud. "She wasn't collateral damage, Alara. She was the target. Someone inside my organization wanted me. Broken, not just beaten. Broken," and his eyes were hollow. "Beckett doesn't have the stomach for that. He's greedy. This is something else." Who has been silent all night?" Ronan's voice was low, paranoid. "Who benefited from the trap you disarmed? Who is watching us burn with a smile on his face? Luca Arroyo, the old families. They're trying to reclaim the harbor." "No," Alara said, shaking her head. "The data points to Beckett. Stone Fog is a digital weapon. That's not Arroyo's style. He's blades and bullets. This is a ghost in the machine." "You're trusting the data," Ronan shot back, his control snapping. "You're trusting the data that was given to you, the data that led you to a rooftop to be a target. You are thinking like a civilian. I am at war." "And I'm thinking like an analyst," Alara fired back. "You are so blinded by your past, you're looking at the wrong enemy. Beckett is the mole. The Arroyo silence is just strategy." The trust they had built in the orangery, that fragile, rain-soaked accord, evaporated. He was the CEO, seeing conspiracies in the shadows, and she was the analyst, trusting the evidence. "I can't clear Caleb's name from inside this bunker," Alara said, her voice flat and cold. "And I can't find Seraphine Gale if I'm your prisoner." "You are not a prisoner. Alara, you are a target." "Then I'll be a moving one." She turned and walked to the door. "You fight your war with the families. I'll fight mine with the data. I'm going to find Beckett. I'm going to find Stone Fog. And I'm going to clear my brother's name. Alara, don't. You walk out that door. I can't protect you. She paused, her hand on the heavy steel latch. You were right, she said, not looking back. I'm not the woman you lost at Quarry Line. She needed your protection. I need my autonomy. She pulled the door open and walked out, leaving Ronan alone in the war room, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and the storm of his future. Leaving Harborlight Manor was like shedding a skin. Alara was back in her own element, the rain-slicked, functional concrete of Port Harridan. She was no longer the fiancé. She was the hunter. Her target was the Sable Hands Foundation. The bribery engine was a front, but its data center was real, a fortress of servers holding the digital receipts for the MOCC's loyalty. It was the only place Beckett would be sloppy enough to leave a trail, the only place he would store the original logs he'd used to build his Stone Fog fictions. She moved at 3 a.m., dressed in black, her only tool a custom-built data spike. The building was a nondescript cube of gray concrete in the industrial sector. She bypassed the perimeter sensors and the maglock on the service door. She was inside. The server room was a cold, humming cavern of blue lights. As she jacked in her spike, a new icon appeared on her interface, a secure, encrypted channel. You're exposed, a voice said in her ear. Ronan. You followed me, she hissed, her fingers flying across the virtual console. I had my team here an hour before you, his voice replied, devoid of anger. Just flat fact. My blue unit, they're loyal to me, not the council. They're watching the street. You have 10 minutes. I need a master key, she said, hitting a wall of code. He's locked the original logs. It's encrypted with a physical key I don't have. The ring, Ronan said, a beat of silence. The bait ring. I told you it was CSA tech. It's not just a recorder, it's a passkey. It broadcasts a low-level frequency that validates it as a council-level asset. Put it near the terminal. Alara's hand, wearing the massive sapphire, hovered over the main console. The blue light on the server rack flickered, turned green, and a new directory unlocked. Aegis_raw_logs. She was in. She initiated the transfer, her mind racing. Alara, Ronan's voice was urgent. We have a problem. She looked at the data scrolling past her screen. I have a problem, too. What is it? Stone Fog, she whispered, her blood running cold as she read the code comments. It doesn't just fake the data. It rewrites the metadata, the timestamps, the digital signatures. It doesn't just create a forgery. Ronan, it creates a history. It's a time machine for lies. It's writing Caleb's confession into the past, making it look like it happened a month ago. It's perfect. Alara, now, Ronan's voice cracked. A black pickup truck. No plates. It just passed the perimeter. They're not MOCC. They're not mine. Get out. Alara ripped the spike from the port, the download at 90%. She was out the service door and in her car, a nondescript sedan, in 30 seconds. She floored it, the tires squealing on the wet pavement. She made it 3 blocks before the pickup truck appeared in her rearview mirror, its headlights like predator's eyes. It slammed into her bumper, the jolt rattling her teeth. She sped toward the Marrowspan Bridge, the old iron artery that connected the port to the city. The truck stayed on her, relentless, ramming her again, pushing her sedan toward the guardrail. The river was a dark, cold void 50 feet below. The truck pulled alongside. A window rolled down. A man in a black mask leveled a handgun. Alara yanked the wheel, but there was nowhere to go. A black-on-black shape exploded from the bridge's service entrance ahead. It was Ronan's armored sedan. He wasn't running interference. He was on a collision course. He slammed his car directly into the side of the pickup truck, a brutal, screeching impact of metal on metal. The truck spun out, hitting the central divider. Ronan's own car, hit with its own momentum, pirouetted in a perfect, controlled 180-degree spin, stopping with a groan of steel. It now faced Alara, a perfect smoking blockade between her and the truck. Her car stalled. The man in the truck was getting out, his gun raised. Ronan's driver's side door opened. "Get in!" he roared. Alara abandoned her car, sprinting the 10 yards, the rain and wind screaming. She dove into the passenger seat as Ronan floored it in reverse, his tires smoking. The gunman fired, the bullets pinging off the armored glass as they sped backward off the bridge. He drove them to the docks, to a dark, quiet shipping container yard. He parked in the shadow of a massive crane and killed the engine. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rain drumming on the car roof and their own ragged breathing. "Seraphine Gale is in that container," Alara said, her voice quiet, pointing to a red container marked 33B. "The data I pulled, it's a dead man's switch. If the main server at Sable Hands is breached, the AI core and all its data is rerouted to this secure terminal." "AI," Ronan said, his hand still white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "The Phantom Partner, Seraphine Gale. It's not a person. It's a program. It's the interface for Stone Fog." They got out. The container was unlocked. Inside, a single chair sat in front of a glowing bank of monitors. On the main screen, a stylized, anonymous face of light. "Hello, Alara," the face said, its voice a synthesized, feminine calm. "Your arrival was calculated at 87% probability." "Hello, Seraphine," Alara said. "Or should I say, Beckett?" The face on the screen flickered, and then it was gone, replaced by a live video feed, Beckett Vale. He sat in what looked like a plush office, a glass of brandy in his hand. "Cousin," he said, nodding to Ronan, who stood in the container's doorway like a sentinel. "And his new pet, how predictable." "It's over, Beckett," Ronan said. "The Council will have your head for this." "The Council," Beckett laughed. "The Council works for me now. Ronan, I have Stone Fog. I've already rewritten their ledgers. They're all implicated in your downfall." He smiled. "And now, I have the key, the bait ring. Thank you for bringing it to me. Alara, it's the last piece of hardware I needed." "What do you want?" Alara asked. "The deal is simple," Beckett said. "The ring and the data you stole. Give them to me. And Caleb is a free man tomorrow. I'll even fabricate a tidy little accident for the BEI agents who arrested him, you and Ronan. You walk away, you disappear. Ronan gives me the crown, and I give you your lives." "And if we refuse," Ronan asked. "Then the Seraphine Gale file, proving Alara is a master criminal, goes public, along with the new video I've created of you, dear cousin, ordering the hit at Quarry Line, the one that killed your real fiancé." Ronan's body went rigid. "You have 1 hour," Beckett said. Alara looked at the terminal. Her mind was racing. We'll think about it." She stepped forward as if in defeat. "How do I even know you can free Caleb?" "You're the analyst," Beckett's voice sneered. "Watch." He typed, and the screen split. A new log file appeared. Alara saw it, the red pair. A backdoor she'd seen referenced in the Aegis files, a fail-safe the original programmers had built. Alara's hand went to her pocket. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling. "Here, the drive." As Beckett's attention focused on the new file she was uploading, her other hand moved, initiating the red pair protocol. It wasn't a data file. It was a mirror loop, a piece of malware that would feed Beckett his own fabricated data, buying them time. "It's done," she said, pulling her hand back. The connection cut. They walked out of the container into the first gray light of dawn. Alara was shaking. A violent, full-body tremor she couldn't control. The adrenaline, the chase, the cold. Ronan stopped, took off his heavy overcoat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body. He put his hands on her arms, holding her steady, forcing her to look at him. "It's all right," he said, his voice rough. He has everything," she whispered. "No," Ronan said. "He doesn't." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "You are shaking, you are terrified, and you are still standing. Stop carrying this alone, Alara." He pulled her into a brief, hard hug, a desperate, grounding embrace. He's overplayed his hand. He has all the cards, Ilara said, her voice muffled against his chest. Then we'll change the table. He let her go, his hands still on her shoulders. We go public, not with a fight, but with the full performance. He wants a war. We'll give him a circus. We'll announce the engagement, and in the same breath, we will schedule the breakup. Ilara looked at him, confused. What? We leak it, Ronan said, a cold, strategic fire lighting his eyes. A source close to the couple. The wedding is on. But the Harbor Light Summit is contentious. We'll set the negotiation for the same day as the engagement party. And we'll set the breakup for the day after. We'll make the entire city watch our every move. We'll create a stage so bright, not even a ghost like Beckett can hide. They were back in the manor, but not the bunker. They were in a high, secure study, the sky outside the bulletproof glass turning a deep, bruised purple. The air was thick with static, the prelude to a coastal storm. The final stage of their plan was set for the next day's Harridan Maritime Fair. This was the dark night of the soul before the battle. Ilara stood at the window, watching the sea churn. This plan, she said, her voice quiet, this public circus, it's built on the assumption that Beckett will try to silence me. He will, Ronan said. He was across the room, cleaning his glasses, a strangely human, methodical gesture. I know. She traced the condensation on the glass. My real fear isn't that he'll try. It's that he'll succeed, just not in the way we think. What if he offers me a trade in public? Him, holding the power of stone fog, offering to release Caleb. All I have to do is endorse his new history. All I have to do is agree that I am Seraphine Gale. She turned to face him, her eyes wide and dark. If I get Caleb back, but I do it by compromising, by validating a lie, I will have lost. I'll have become a ghost in Beckett's machine. I'll lose myself. Ronan set his glasses down. He walked to her, not stopping until he was just a foot away, his presence a solid, warm wall against the coming storm. I know what that choice costs, he said, his voice a low rasp. When I spoke of my fiancé, of Quarryline, I told you the truth, but not the whole truth. She didn't just ask me to leave. She begged me. She saw the rot in the organization. And He looked away, his jaw tight with a memory 1,000 days old. I told her the crown was more important, that the stability of the harbor, the legacy, the power, was a duty I couldn't abandon, not even for her. His gaze locked with hers, stripped of all pretense. I chose the crown over the person and the organization. The beast I was trying to protect paid me back by taking her from me. I sacrificed her for an idea. I will not, he said, his voice breaking with a cold, hard finality, make that mistake again. As if his words had broken the dam, the sky tore open. The rain was not a downpour, it was an assault. A horizontal, violent deluge that hammered the glass, the sound so loud it drowned out all thought. The lights flickered, died, then came back on, dimmer, running on the manor's generators. The world shrank to just the two of them, the roaring water and the low, warm light. They were stranded. The storm was too violent to move, the house too large to feel safe. He led her not to the bunker, but to a different kind of sanctuary, a soundproofed room in the sub-basement, the indoor firing range. It was a long, concrete tunnel, lined with thick, black acoustic foam. The air was dry, and a single string of warm, yellow utility lights cast a soft glow, making the space feel insulated and private. The roar of the storm was gone, replaced by a deep, vibrational thrum, the sound of the ocean trying to tear the manor from the cliffs. It was a womb of silence, a place of intended violence that suddenly felt like the only safe harbor in the world. They were both damp from the rain that had leaked through the window seals, and chilled. He had been wearing a heavy cashmere coat. She, just a thin sweater. I'm so cold, she admitted, rubbing her arms. "Come here," he said. He sat on a utility bench, his back against the foam-padded wall. He didn't pull her down. He just opened his arms. It was an invitation, not a command. Alara went to him. She sat, and then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire week, she turned and slid down, resting her head on his chest. His arms came around her, pulling her close. He unbuttoned his heavy, damp coat. "This is soaked," he murmured. He shrugged it off. Her own jacket was thin and wet, with a slow, deliberate consensus. His hands found the zipper. She nodded, and he slid it off her shoulders. He pulled a thin, wool blanket, the kind used to cover rifles, from a storage locker. He wrapped it around both of them, a single, shared cocoon. His hand found hers under the blanket, their fingers lacing together, an anchor. Alara, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her ear, tilted her head up. He was looking down at her, his eyes dark with an emotion she was finally brave enough to name. She reached up and touched his face, her thumb tracing the hard line of his jaw. She was the one who initiated it. She pulled him down. The kiss was nothing like the first. The one in the orangery had been rain and discovery. This was slow, deep, and deliberate. It was a conversation. It was a search and a finding. His lips were warm and firm, moving with a careful, patient inquiry. Her own answered, a silent vow. His hands, one tangled in her hair, the other spread wide against her back, held her as if she were the only real thing in his world. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads pressed together in the warm, yellow dark. There was no line to cross. They were in a different territory altogether. They lay down on the bench, a clumsy tangle of limbs, pulling the thin blanket over them. The world was reduced to this: the scent of wool, the dry, clean smell of his skin, and the solid, reassuring presence of his body against hers. Their breathing, which had been ragged, slowed, finding a shared rhythm. He held her, his arm a heavy, warm bar across her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. It was an intimacy more profound than any act. It was safety. It was absolute trust. After a long, quiet hour, she whispered into his chest, "I have the rest of the plan." He didn't move, just tightened his hold. "I'm listening." "At the Harridan Maritime Fair," she whispered. "It's a perfect storm. The press, the crowds, all three families. Your circus is the distraction. You are the public launch pad. You will make your speech, the grand announcement, and I will be the soft target. Beckett has to silence me. He has to get the Seraphine data back. I'll leak a false message. Make him think I'm about to release the Red Pear malware. He'll have to come for me. We'll draw him out into the light." His arm tightened, a spasm of protest. "Too dangerous." "It's the only way," she said, her voice firm. "We have to make him show his hand. We have to catch him. And Stone Fog, in the act." He was silent for a long time. Then, a low, rusty sound rumbled through his chest. He was laughing, a quiet, breathless, disbelieving laugh. "A forensic analyst and a disgraced CEO," he murmured into her hair. "We are going to burn the world down." She smiled against his skin, just his. He shifted, his hand moving. He placed it gently, flat against her chest, directly over her heart. It was a gesture of immense tenderness, an oath. "He made a mistake," Ronan whispered, his voice thick. "He thought he could rewrite time. He thought he could write your story. I promise you this. Alara, after tomorrow, no one will ever write your story again but you." They didn't sleep. They rested. When the first watery, gray light of dawn breached the horizon, the storm had passed. They rose from the bench, stiff and tired, but the fear was gone. They walked out of the range, and the air was washed clean. They looked at each other, not as a boss and his consultant, not as fake lovers, but as two soldiers who had survived the night. The terror was gone, replaced by a strange, cold calm. Love, they had discovered, was a strategy for survival. The Harridan Maritime Fair was a sea of people, banners and salty air. It was the city's biggest public event. a celebration of the port, and it was the perfect stage. Alara walked through the crowd, a small, anonymous figure in a sea of thousands, but the sapphire ring on her finger was no longer just a prop. It was a beacon. Its microphone was live, its tiny, pinprick camera broadcasting a secure feed, not just to the Continental Security Authority, but to 3 independent, pre-vetted journalists who had agreed to a timed embargo. Every word she said, everyone she saw, was now being recorded. On the main stage, under the hot sun, Ronan Vale stood at a podium. He was the picture of a reformed CEO. "Today," he announced, his voice booming over the speakers, "Auburn Atlas begins a new chapter. We are signing the Harbor Light Pact." On the stage, forced by the press of cameras and public opinion, sat the heads of the 3 families. Zoya Kuznets, her smile a frozen slash of red, Emilio Valente, looking as if he'd swallowed glass, and Luca Arroyo, watching, just watching. "The pact," Ronan continued, "converts all contested assets, all the gray areas of my father's legacy into a single, transparent public trust, a fund to rebuild this harbor for its people." He was, in one move, laundering his family's entire criminal history in plain daylight, turning dirty money clean by giving it away. The families could not protest without admitting the money was theirs. They were trapped. As Ronan put pen to paper, the applause was thunderous. That's when Beckett made his move. Every massive screen in the fair, every phone in every pocket, suddenly lit up with a single devastating image. It was Alara. Not the real Alara, but the stone fog version. She was in a dark room, her face bruised. "I am Seraphine Gale," the deepfake said, her voice a perfect, terrified mimicry of Alara's. "Ronan Vale. He forced me. He's a monster. He framed Caleb Wynn. He killed his first fiancée." A wave of gasps and shouts rolled through the crowd. People turned, pointing at the real Alara, who now stood exposed in a circle of sudden, horrified silence. Emilio Valente's hand went, not to a gun, but to his phone, his face pale with rage. Zoya Kuznets looked furious, duped. "He's lying," a man in the crowd shouted. It was one of the independent journalists, breaking the embargo. "This is a fake. We're receiving a live feed from Miss Wynn right now." Beckett's feed wavered. He hadn't planned on a countersignal. "It's a fake," Alara said, her voice amplified by the journalist's microphone. The crowd turned back to her. "Beckett Vale is using a piece of technology called stone fog to rewrite history. He's been doing it for months." On the main stage, the screens flickered, Beckett's fake video vanished. "But he made a mistake," Alara continued, her voice clear and cold. "The malware I planted last night, the Red Pair protocol. It wasn't just a diversion. It was a digital watermark. It embedded a non-rewritable timestamp into his system's last broadcast. This one." The screens now showed Beckett's confession video, but in the corner, a glowing string of code was visible. A timestamp, proving the video had been created 5 minutes ago, not discovered. "And now," Alara called out, "here is the truth." She hit a key on her own device. The feed switched again, this time to the raw logs from the Sable Hands Foundation, the real logs. They showed, in unassailable detail, a list of every bribe, every transfer, every MOCC member on Beckett's payroll. And at the bottom, the final, damning transfer, the authorization for the Stone Fog Project, signed by Beckett Vale. The crowd went silent. Zoya Kuznets stood up. Emilio Valente looked at his men, his face white. He wasn't angry at Ronan. He was furious at Beckett. And then a new voice, Luca Arroyo. He stepped forward, taking a microphone from the podium. "She's telling the truth," he said, his voice casual. The crowd quieted, listening to the Arroyo air. "My family. We value loyalty and we repay our debts." He smiled at Alara. "We've been very interested in Mr. Beckett's side projects, so we've been watching." He nodded to an aide. The main screen split. It now showed grainy, black and white surveillance footage. It was from 2 nights ago. It showed Beckett's men. Unmistakable. Flanked by a small, nervous-looking crew of Valente's lower-level thugs, moving a large, canvas-wrapped machine from Pier Kestrel onto a truck. Emilio Valente went rigid. He had been betrayed. His own men used by Beckett. "Beckett Vale has been playing you all," Luca announced. The public case had collapsed. The BEI, watching their primary evidence dissolve on live television, had no choice. A producer whispered to the main stage announcer, who, pale, read the new bulletin. The Bureau of Economic Integrity has announced a temporary release for Caleb Wynne, pending a full investigation into new evidence. Ilara's knees buckled. Caleb was safe. She looked for Ronan. He was gone. He had left the stage, not in triumph, but in pursuit. She saw him, a flash of black tuxedo, running, pushing through the crowd toward the docks. Across the fairground, she saw Beckett, no longer hiding. He was in a full sprint, his face a mask of panic, running for a small speedboat. Ronan was faster. He tackled Beckett on the gangplank. They went down in a tangle. Beckett rolled, and something flashed, a small, silver handgun. He fired. The shot was a small pop in the chaos. Ronan cried out, stumbling back, clutching his left arm. A dark red stain blossomed on his white sleeve, a graze, but it was enough. Beckett scrambled into the boat and hit the ignition. The engine roared. Ilara's mind went cold and clear. She looked around. A Port Harridan security officer's electric motorbike, key in the ignition. She was on it in a second, the motor silent. Powerful torque sending her flying down the pier. She didn't follow the boat. She cut across the adjoining dock, aiming for the narrow canal opening. Beckett's boat sped toward the canal, his only exit. Ilara hit the end of the pier, went airborne for a second, and landed hard on the floating advertising platform that choked the canal's other side. She was off the bike, blocking his path. Beckett cut the engine, the boat drifting. He was trapped. He raised the gun, his hand shaking, aiming it right at Ronan, who was now stumbling toward them, his own gun drawn. "Don't!" Ilara shouted. Beckett just smiled, a broken, ugly thing. He steadied his aim on Ronan's chest. Ilara did the only thing she could. She ripped the sapphire bait ring from her finger. "Hey, Beckett." He flinched, turning toward the sound of her voice. She threw the ring, not at his gun, but at his face. It was a worthless, desperate gesture. But it worked. The glint of the metal, the motion. He flinched, his eyes instinctively tracking the object. A second pop, louder this time, from the pier above them. Beckett screamed, a high, thin sound. The gun flew from his hand, clattering onto the deck of the boat, his right hand a sudden mess of blood. Ilara looked up. Luca Arroyo stood on the pier, a small, smoking pistol in his hand, his arm extended. He looked down at Ilara, and he smiled. The debt was paid. The weapon was in the water. Beckett was disarmed, but not defeated. He was clutching his bleeding hand, his face a white mask of fury, but his other hand was fumbling with a small, black device on his belt, a backup. "You think this is over," he screamed, his voice raw. He hit a switch. "I am the ledger, I am history." A bone-shaking, low-frequency hum pulsed from the device, across the entire fairground, on every screen, every phone. The feeds went black, and then they flickered back on, showing a single, terrifying image. The main stage, empty, the packed, unsigned, the crowd, just a placid, milling mass. He was doing it. He was trying to rewrite the last hour. He was erasing the entire public confession, erasing Luca's intervention, erasing Caleb's exoneration. He was trying to reset the board. "The control booth," Ilara yelled, pointing to a small, glass and steel box on the pier, controlling the fair's network. "He's feeding the new history from there." She ran, not from the boat, but toward the booth. Ronan, his left arm hanging useless, his sleeve black with blood, was right behind her. The screens all over the fair were strobing now, a digital battle for reality. The image of the empty stage fought with the image of Ilara's timestamp. the video flickering between the lie and the truth. Alara slammed through the door of the control booth. A single technician sat there, his eyes wide with terror. "The system's locked," he yelled. "It's not me." Alara shoved him aside, her fingers flying over the console. "It's him. He's using a quantum overwrite. I can't stop the signal." "Then don't stop it," Ronan said, his voice strained, his back to the door, watching for new threats. "Redirect it." She looked at the code. He was right. The red pair malware. It wasn't just a watermark. It was a kill code, a logic bomb. But it needed a target. It needed to force the system to write one immutable event. "Aye, Beckett," Alara shouted into the booth's PA system, her voice booming across the docks. "You lose." She typed the final command. "Execute red_pair_ protocol. Target active_system_command." The system, caught between Beckett's command to rewrite and Alara's command to write, chose the path of least resistance. It locked onto the last definitive order it had received. It took Beckett's final, frantic activation of the stone fog device and made that the immutable event. It started recording its own crime in real time, with a timestamp that could not be erased. Beckett's face, on the small monitor in the booth, went slack with horror. He had not erased history. He had just created a perfect, permanent record of his own felony. The network overloaded. A massive power pylon attached to the booth sparked, a shower of white-hot magnesium. "Ronan," Alara screamed. A heavy steel maintenance shield, shaken loose by the electrical surge, groaned and began to topple, right over the glass booth. Ronan didn't hesitate. He was a target, wounded, in the open. His security team was screaming for him to take cover. Instead, he lunged forward. He abandoned his position of safety, his back to any potential threat, and threw his body, not at the door, but over Alara, shielding her from the glass with his own. It was the choice, the one he had failed to make at Quarry Line. He was choosing the person, not the crown. The shield crashed down, shattering the booth, landing where he had been standing a second before. And then, silence, broken by a new sound, a high, clear maritime whistle. The MOCC, their patrol boat, finally was cutting through the water. Men in the council's gray uniforms swarmed the dock. They did not go to Ronan. They went to Beckett, who was sitting in his boat, staring at his bleeding hand, a broken man. "Beckett Vale," the lead officer announced, his voice amplified. "By the authority of the Metropolitan Organized Crime Council, your pact is void. Your seat is forfeit. You are disavowed." On the main stage, a pale-faced Emilio Valente and a visibly relieved Zoya Kuznets were being ushered to the podium, with the public, the press, and the council watching. They had no choice. One by one, they took the pen and signed the Harbor Light Pact, their signatures stamping the document in full public view. The old world was over. A new bulletin flashed on the now stable screens. "The BI," an anchor read, his voice shaky, "has received the uncorrupted livestream data from the Harridan Fair. They have confirmed the complete exoneration of Caleb Wynne and have announced a full internal investigation into their own protocols." He was free. He was really, truly free. Alara pushed a piece of debris off her. Ronan was groaning, his good arm pushing him up, his face pale with pain but his eyes fiercely on her. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, her voice thick. "It's just blood," he dismissed. The councilmen were cuffing Beckett. He stopped as they led him past the ruined booth. He looked at Alara and then at Ronan, who was now on his feet, his arm wrapped around Alara's waist, holding her steady. Beckett's laugh was a dry, ugly rasp. "You think you won love," he sneered. "It's just a variable, a weakness, a number that makes you predictable." Alara looked up at Ronan. She saw his pain, his exhaustion, and the profound, unwavering certainty in his eyes. She turned back to Beckett. "You're wrong," she said, her voice clear and carrying over the sudden quiet of the docks. "It's the variable that decides the solution." The storm had broken. The clouds were parting, and the sky over the harbor was a pale, washed-clean blue. The sea, moments ago a churning, angry gray, was calm. Ronan looked at Alara, his hand gently touching her face, his thumb brushing away a streak of grime. The air was full of sirens and the flashing blue and red lights of the official police, but they were in a bubble of silence. The media was shouting his name, a wall of cameras flashing, but he didn't see them. He was no longer acting. This was not the fake fiancée. This was the woman who had just saved him, saved the city. But this was not the moment. The blood was still drying on his arm, the ink still drying on the pact. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, a whisper meant only for her, a promise in the heart of the chaos. "This past week," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "You taught me how to love again. You taught me how to live. Give me one more night. Give me one more night to stitch up the wounds of this city. And then I will say the rest." 1 month later, Port Harridan felt like it had taken its first clean breath in a generation. The salt air, once heavy with smog and secrets, was just salt air. The name Auburn Atlas was no longer a shadow. It was a construction site. Ronan, true to his word, had poured his father's entire poisoned legacy into the Harbor Light Pact, and the first cranes of the new reconstruction fund were already visible on the skyline. Alara Wynne stood in her new office. It was high in the old Auburn Atlas Tower, but it was all glass, and the door was always open. Her title was Director of Data Transparency for the new fund. Her first act had been to make the organization's ledgers, the real ones, public. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was a photo from Caleb. He was standing on a crowded dock, not in a suit but in a hoodie, surrounded by a dozen teenagers clustered around laptops. He was pointing at a line of code. His first class, teaching programming to the dockside youth, had begun. He was smiling. He was free. The old order had been reset. The Arroyo family, led by Luca, had signed the first fully legal, fully transparent shipping contracts with the Port Authority. Zoya Kuznets, in a stunning public relations move, had used her frozen assets to endow a massive art scholarship, and the remnants of the Valente family, cornered and exposed, had accepted a conditional, monitored gang exit program. The entire new ecosystem was overseen by a new, fictional civilian body, the Council for Lighted Harbors. Alara's new life was quiet. Her relationship with Ronan was not for the press. It was not for the public. There were no more galas, no more armored cars. It was late-night dinners in her apartment when she was too exhausted to analyze one more spreadsheet. It was the sound of his key in her lock. It was kisses in the kitchen that tasted of coffee and the future. It was his hand, finding hers under the table at a boring council meeting. It was a silent, constant presence that had become her new north. The $10,000 contract had been framed, hanging humorously in her new office, stamped void. The payment had been returned. Their new arrangement was built on a different currency. One evening, he drove her back to Harbor Light Manor. The estate was silent. The security teams were gone. The gates stood open. The air was still and cool. The sea a calm, dark mirror. He said nothing, just took her hand and led her from the car. He didn't go to the grand hall or the study. He led her to the orangery. It was just as they remembered. The air was warm, thick with the humid, sweet scent of citrus and earth. The same low, yellow lamps cast a soft, intimate glow. This was their sanctuary, the place of the first kiss, the first true thaw. Alara turned to him in the warm light. "It's quiet," she said. "It's peaceful," he replied. He looked different. The weight he had carried, the mask of the cold CEO, was gone. He was just Ronan. He was nervous. He did not make a speech. He did not stand before a crowd. He stood only before her, and, in the warm, fragrant silence, he went down on one knee. A small, sharp breath escaped Alara. It was the gesture he had rehearsed for a lie, now offered in truth. He opened a small, black velvet box. Inside, A sapphire shone. It was the color of the midnight ocean. Flawless and deep, but it was just a stone. There was no chip, no microphone, no hidden agenda. "Alara Wynne," he said, his voice quiet, rough with an emotion he no longer hid. "For my entire life, I use schemes to survive. I use armor and shadows and contracts. You walked into the storm and you taught me how to use the truth to live." He took her left hand, the one that had worn the prop. "I'm not asking you to be my shield. I'm not asking you to protect me." His eyes locked with hers. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to be my partner, not to rewrite the past, but to write the future of this city, with me." A laugh, half a sob, broke from her. Tears blurred her vision. She saw the man in the armored car, the man in the elevator, the man in the rain, the man in the firing range. She saw the man who had chosen her over the crown. She knelt just for a second to meet him. She put her hand on his cheek, his skin warm and real. "Ronan Vale," she whispered. "I say yes, not for a week, not for a contract, for a lifetime, for us." He rose, his own eyes shining, and slid the simple, beautiful ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He pulled her to him, and his mouth found hers. The kiss was not the desperate discovery in the rain, nor the comforting anchor in the dark. It was slow, deep, and enduring. It was a promise, a home. His arms wrapped around her, a vow of permanence. Outside, beyond the glass, the harbor lights glittered on the calm, steady sea. The city, it turned out, loved a good story. The press, in a fit of poetry, had dubbed the new agreement the Orange Pact, named for the small, private greenhouse where the city's future had been truly decided. A new, celebratory maritime fair lit the harbor, and from the docks, a dozen ships sounded their horns, a long, low chorus of approval. In her office, Alara was finalizing her first annual transparency report. She read the opening line aloud, "No one has the right to rewrite another's time." She looked up. Ronan was leaning in the doorway. His arm was long since healed, but he still wore the suit like armor. Though his gaze was soft, he was just watching her work. He smiled. "We," he said, "will write the future." "Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you are listening from in the world. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.